Prose, first of all, we will begin it with its definition. It is that form of language which shows a natural flow of speech and grammatical structure instead of a regular rhythmic pattern which is followed in poetry. So poetry is actually when end words keep on rhyming together. When words are arranged in a particular sequence using some figures of speech, so that when you recite a particular poem, a musical effect is created, a rhythmic effect is created. But instead of poetry, which is something meant to be recited, prose is simple, ordinary, day to day conversation. It includes essays, it includes newspaper reports, it includes day to day conversation, it includes any kind of piece that you come across. Maybe it's a hoarding, maybe it's a message on Instagram. So, anything which is written in an ordinary way of communication, that is considered as prose. Prose includes spoken dialogue, facts. In discourse, when you talk about the pros and cons of a thing, when you lecture about something, when you discuss a topic with your peers. And it also includes fictional writing, something which is written to explain something, some description in a narrative. Suppose you are writing a story and you keep on describing the scene, that wind was blowing this way, there were tall trees, and that kind of tree was had just dropped its leaves. So that kind of narrative will also be a part of prose. It usually appears in newspapers, magazines, film, history, and law. The word, as far as etymology of the word is concerned, it originated from a Latin word, prosa oratio, that means direct speech. When you talk to someone directly without the use of any rhythmic annotations, then that becomes prose. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who is a very great critic, he once remarked, he is famous for his literary ballads which he produced with William Wordsworth, and is also famous for Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which is a very good poem, and Kubla Khan, which is a supernatural poem. And apart from that, Samuel Taylor Coleridge has written a book on criticism of English literature, that is called Biographia Literaria. So he once remarked that prose is words in their best order, whereas he made a contrast of this prose with poetry, and he says that if poetry is the best words in the best order, then prose is words in best order. The first prose works, as far as English literary history is concerned, these were written by King Alfred near the end of the 9th century, NINETH. It has now become the language of essays, short stories, and novels. Even everyday speech in which we talk to each other, we talk to our peers, we talk to our classmates, that is also prose. There are certain types of prose. First is non-fictional. It is based on facts, like the prose that you find in biographies, in TV documentaries, in essays. Second is fictional, which you find in novels. As I just told you, when you describe a particular event, when you describe a particular character, when you give description of some natural phenomenon within a novel or a short story, then it becomes fictional prose. It becomes heroic. Heroic when you narrate brave deeds performed by a person, as we find in legends and in tales. Suppose folk tales, suppose tales related to King Vikramaditya, suppose there are tales which are related to Lord Rama. So these legends, when these are described, they also take part of, they also are described in prose. Then we also have prose poetry, which uses emotional effects and rich imagery. Here the poet does not pay much attention to end rhyming of words. Certain examples of prose include 1984, which is a novel by George Orwell, and No Easy Walk to Freedom, which is a speech by Nelson Mandela, the African leader. Prose is largely adapted as a writing style these days, because writers feel comfortable with its loosely defined structure. Whereas if you talk about poetry, there are so many figures of speech, there are so many patterns for versification, like iambic tetrameter, iambic pentameter, trochaic, and then you have terza rima, you have rhyme royal, you have Spenser and stanza, you have couplets and sonnets. There are so many various forms which are there in poetry, and a writer must be very conscious when he or she talks about the number of syllables in a line. But prose is relatively very easy. Here you do not have to find a word which rhymes with another one. Here you do not have to look for internal rhyming patterns or assonance or alliteration in a line, though you can use certain figures of speech to make your prose more imaginative, more creative, more beautiful. Then we come to next literary term, which is essay. An essay is a piece of writing that presents author's own point of view as or an argument. This is the major classification of an essay, or the major definition. The major part of the essay's definition includes that it is the personal opinion or argument of an essayist. He or she tries to convince the reader by presenting certain illustrations, certain facts, certain arguments, certain logical details. He or she may take out this hypothesis to argue for a particular point, and that can be a religious point, that can be a philosophical viewpoint, that can be a scientific idea, that can be some historical concept that the writer is talking about. But it is now up to the reader whether he or she is convinced by the argument proposed by the author. The essayist therefore uses certain devices to convince his reader of his opinion, his or her opinion, and these include illustrations, which are certain examples, certain data, certain diagrams, certain pictures, images, or he or she uses humor. Some comical element is introduced to make the essay more appealing. For example, when we read spoken English and broken English, there you say how G.B. Shaw takes personal example, how he talks to his wife and how he talks to a stranger in a street, or how he talks to his listeners over a radio talk. And there he creates humor to present home the point that our home manners or our private manners are very much different from our public manners. There are certain types of essays. These include, first is formal essay. Here the writer writes as an authority on the subject and expounds it, keeps on explaining that topic at length, and he does so in a very ordered and thorough fashion. For example, whenever we talk about an essay typically follows a 5-paragraph structure. Here the first paragraph is the introduction of the topic, second, third and fourth paragraph keep on elaborating the same idea or the same topic, and but there must be some logical connection within these paragraphs, and the last paragraph is conclusion. This is called the 5-paragraph structure of a typical essay, but that does not mean that all essays end up within these 5 paragraphs. Essays can go back to 3, 4, 5, 10 pages also, and but here the pattern will be the same. The first part will be introduction, where the readers are introduced with the main topic, what the author is trying to say or trying to convince. Then subsequently author will keep on building arguments in favor of the main idea that he or she has proposed. He or she will keep on quoting certain examples, certain humorous passages, certain events from his own personal memory, from his own personal life, certain biographical references, certain facts and figures, certain pictures, diagrams, illustrations, graphs and charts, and all these will be centered around building that particular argument in favor of the idea that the writer is proposing. And the last part is conclusion of the whole essay. So we find these essays, these formal essays, in magazine issues. For example, if you go to Reader's Digest, India Today, most of the essays, even in newspaper, in Spectrum Tribune, in Spectrum part of the Tribune, or in the middle pages of the Tribune, where certain military actions or certain political actions, certain historical concepts are discussed and debated. So these are basically in the form of essays. So informal or personal essay, here the writer assumes that there is an intimacy between the author and the reader. That means the author is very much aware that reader wants to know something from his personal life. So he feels that there is a close connection between the author and the reader, and therefore he feels that there is an intimacy with he has an intimacy with his audience and is concerned with everyday things. It's written in a rather relaxed style. It's more humorous in comparison to formal essay. Now, when we talk about etymology of the word essay, it originated from Montaigne's essays written in French in 1580, and essay basically means to make an attempt, to try something, to try talking about a subject or a topic. The title meant making certain attempts. Francis Bacon wrote brilliant essays. These are the names of some of the essays that he's written, like Of Truth, Of Marriage, and The Single Life, etc. Some other prominent essays are Charles Lamb, E.M. Forster, and George Orwell. Essays are commonly used as the most suitable medium for literary criticism, for presenting political manifestos, for making certain learned arguments, or for reflecting over certain issue of contemporary concern. Some modern forms of the essays are like film essays and the photographic essay, where you share a photograph. For example, say this cyclone has just come, and the writer clicks a photograph of the cyclone, or he or she clicks a photograph of a hospital where COVID patients are lying, and then he keeps on elaborating what viruses are and how this situation has been created, what has been the effect of this situation on our economy, and whether we are better prepared to fight with this kind of pandemic or not. Aldous Huxley remarked that the essay is a literary device for saying almost everything about almost anything. Certain other examples of good essays include Of Love by Francis Bacon, The Autobiography of a Kettle by John Russell, and the function of the essay is to inform, persuade, explain, or entertain the audience. This is the function which is performed if a writer writes an essay for his audience.